Yeah, when it comes to a summit like this, and this is the reason why everyone's been calling it high stakes, including the president this morning on Truth Social, is when you have a summit like this, it's mostly ceremonial. They're pretty boring to cover. The leaders come to the table and sign up for something that their teams have been negotiating for months or years. This is the opener for what potentially could be a very long process when it comes to this negotiation. I think Putin was driven to the table most recently with Trump talking about secondary sanctions. But Putin wants a deal that's going to go his way. And he probably doesn't feel necessary at this moment to make many of those concessions,
right.
Unless potentially he does feel like there's something worthwhile on the table when it comes to sanctions relief. But it remains to be seen how serious Putin is. For him, having this meeting, coming to Alaska, the Russian press are going to view this, the Kremlin's going to view this as a win.
I should point out, folks, Annmarie Hordern is the only American who's actually visited all 27 European nations. You know, it's like she's got a merit badge for years ago. What shifted, Annmarie, in the last 3 or 4 days because of a conference call with European leaders? What's different now than Tuesday?
The European leaders really feel like they are aligned with the president, or rather, the president is aligned with them. They had this call with the president yesterday, really urging him to make sure he does not talk about territorial swaps, and that he remains committed that for this longer conversation, for a full peace negotiation, maybe not a cessation of hostilities, but a peace negotiation, President Zelensky needs to be at the table. There's been a tremendous amount of behind-the-scenes diplomacy between the European capitals and Washington, also J.D. Vance in Europe, having these meetings in person. And Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, was just on Twitter earlier this morning saying that Europe stands behind the president. The president has given them those reassurances. And Trump even said in a Fox News interview that he doesn't want to get into divvying up. He doesn't like the term, but he said you can see why it's a good term, divvying up the territory until this second meeting, when potentially it could be between President Putin and President Zelensky. So that seems to reassure the European capitals that Trump is not going to strike a deal himself between Putin that then Zelensky would have to just take.
Annmarie, will there be a joint press conference following the talks between Presidents Putin and Trump?
Well, Yuri Yushchenkov, a foreign policy aide to President Putin for years, certainly thinks so. That's what he briefed the press on this week. There will be a joint news conference. But then President Trump did say in this Fox News interview yesterday that if the meeting does not go well, he is going to leave. And he said he would have a press conference, but he's going to have that press conference solo. And if President Putin is not coming to the table in a genuine way with concessions and a willingness to talk about this issue, we should also quickly note that Putin is here almost weighing what's going on in Ukraine equally, or maybe even less. For him, it's almost an asterisk. For Russia, they really want to restart a bilateral relationship with Washington.
Well,
they want to talk about arms control. You have the New START treaty just expiring next year. They want to talk about sanctions relief. And we're right here south of the Arctic Circle. They want to talk about economic cooperation. But for this White House, you cannot do that until you get past some sort of cessation of hostilities and a peace agreement when it comes to Moscow and Kyiv.
Hey, mates, it's right where I wanted to go. And I mean, is really the goal of Mr. Putin here to get back to at least G7.5? If not G8? I mean, is that what this is really about? Is, you know, Ukraine is less, and it's really getting Russia back into the diplomatic fold?
Well, they definitely want to make sure that they are putting an emphasis on the bilateral relationship with the United States, regardless of what is going on in Ukraine. And you can see why that is incredibly difficult for President Trump, especially with the backing of European leaders. He views himself as really a mediator, wants to view himself as a mediator in this conflict. But you will have some foreign policy experts that do think it is incredibly important that these conversations do not get lost because of the war in Ukraine. They impress upon you the fact that the New START treaty, we're talking about nuclear arms here, and a lot of work would need to go into that to extend that treaty or have a new one. That expires in just a few months. For Putin, though, that would be a win to make sure that they are having this bilateral meeting with the United States because they have been really isolated from what, let's say, the western part of the world, because Putin has certainly not been isolated from other parts of the world where you look at, obviously, the BRICS, the
Right.
Middle East, and, of course, China.